This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I want to talk to you about the American so-called mainstream media, or the media wherever you happen to live, whatever nation you live in. But focusing on America, because America boasts that there exists a free press. Does America truly have a free press? Do you think America has a free press? Do you think that what you watch on the various news channels, the cable news network channels, the entertainment channels, the talk shows, etc., the episodic TV shows, the television series, the comedy shows, and all the rest of just the television media, not to mention radio broadcasting media, or literary book publishing media, or the big tech giant media, the internet, search engines, social media platforms, magazines, newspapers, which are primarily now the primary readership of magazines and newspapers is online. So, when you add up all this media, and I'm sure I've left out a bunch of it, you come away with this concept, which I think is fairly accurate, is that the media is it's like what H.G. Wells, the great science fiction author, called the world brain, or the hive mind. Now, in H.G. Wells' writings, which were both fiction, he wrote science fiction, like War of the Worlds, Invisible Man, Island of Dr. Moreau, and so many others that have been made into feature films. But H.G. Wells also wrote a ton of books on nonfiction stuff. Let me give you an example of some of the things that H.G. Wells. He was a powerful intellectual, powerful author, powerful in so many ways, and a member of the British elite and secret societies in Great Britain before World War I and for time after World War I. And he was also, because this is an important part to know about him, he was also the head of British intelligence during World War I. So he knew about things that the average person couldn't possibly have known about. He was also a member of numerous secret societies and occult organizations like the Illuminati, like Freemasonry, etc. And what is, I don't know if the word is amusing, but it's sadly amusing. Like so many others of the British elite, the ruling class, the globalist elite in Great Britain, they would put on this public act as if they were atheists, as if they were strictly people who viewed reality from the, quote, scientific perspective. So all of the members of the British elite, when I say all, I mean the majority, people like Sir Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley, H.G. Wells, John Maynard Keynes, the economist, Bertrand Russell, the mathematician, and on and on and on. So H.G. Wells was the head of British intelligence. He discipled, by the way, Aldous Huxley, the creator of the concept, the scientific dictatorship, and author of Brave New World. He discipled Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian Huxley, who worked for the United Nations, the special global division of the United Nations called UNESCO, and this was the United Nations department that would standardize all of education on planet Earth and create, and these are the words of Julian Huxley in the 40s and early 50s, they planned to create a common core educational program to train young people, to program young people to perceive themselves as citizens of a new world order, as global citizens, and program them with humanist ideas, definitely not Christian ideas. So both of the Huxley brothers were powerfully influential in America and the rest of the world, and they were discipled by H.G. Wells. So this was a secretive elite that was very, very powerful. And they ended up controlling the minds and the plans for the globalist elite and for nations and societies all over the world. Now, what H.G. Wells would write about in his nonfiction books, they would be discourses on the need for a new world order, and he would go into detail about what this new world order would mean. H.G. Wells wrote books like The Open Conspiracy, and he would talk about the fact that, in reality, there is a hardcore, highly organized, highly financed conspiracy, and those were the words used by H.G. Wells. So when you have some airhead from the media, when you have some uneducated moron speaking either in the media or for some other source, because the media doesn't have an exclusive monopoly on uneducated morons. I don't mean to be unkind, but uneducated morons are filled. The churches in America are filled with uneducated morons. You say, Paul, that's cruel, that's unkind. I don't mean it as to be unkind. I really don't. There's sarcasm here, but my purpose is not cruelty. Do you know what I'm saying? My purpose is not to be mean. My purpose is to use kind of like verbal shock to wake people up that are asleep. Because you see, any man or any woman alive, especially in America, that has even the most minimal desire to know the truth about anything, especially the truth about life, but to know the truth about the world in which we live, to know the real truth about the world in which we live, not the lies that we've been programmed to believe since childhood in the educational system and by the media. Anyone in America, no matter what your income level is, if you desire truth, if you thirst after righteousness, anyone in America and in many nations of the world, that truth, that knowledge is easily available to you. I mean, despite the fact that there's incredible rigging and censorship of the internet still will allow you to gain all kinds of information and all kinds of alternative information if you will just exercise a tiny bit of diligence and poke around on the internet and not just assume that whatever question you're asking, if you want the truth about whatever question you're asking, like, let me give you an example. Let's say you want the truth on chemtrails, okay? Because there's truth about chemtrails. Now, if you go into your favorite search engine and the first 15 pages is all a bunch of propaganda saying that chemtrails is not a real concern, chemtrails are not even real, chemtrails is a conspiracy theory, okay, you probably figured out by now that censorship, that's rigging of the internet. But you just have to exercise a little bit of persistence and play around with the questions and try to find out from others what are the names of people and the names of websites and blogs and the names of writers, etc., that answer these questions but also have integrity. In other words, they're not wackos or whatever. So with just a little bit of digging, and by not taking no for an answer, when all the propaganda comes up that blocks you from the truth, you don't give up. You just persist a little bit, and after you do it a bunch of times, you find out it's pretty easy. And you find out you can read all kinds of reports that are documented, that are authenticated. The challenge will be, because this is how the internet and search engine rigging has really occurred and morphed itself into, what the strategy is by the elite that control the internet from behind the scenes, is what they've done is they've done what I would call overt censorship and blocking truth from you easily. But you can overcome like that, just like I said. But what you have to really be careful about is the slippery ice of the thousands and thousands of phony disinformation blogs, websites, YouTubes, articles, social media pages. And man, you know, I've been very busy and very intensely involved in a number of research projects and evangelistic outreach projects that will win countless numbers of souls across the world. And I've been consumed with this for the past year, so I haven't been doing the level of research that I usually do. But now I'm back into it, and the first thing I noticed in such a short period of time, I'm talking about 5 months, the internet is like consciousness. They constantly change the consciousness of the internet. And what I discovered, and it hit me like a 2x4 being smacked in the head in the morning without a cup of coffee. What I noticed was that the primary way that they were rigging the internet is they now have tens of thousands of artificial, manufactured, synthetic websites, blog sites, YouTubes, social media pages. And in some areas, there are now hundreds of thousands of artificial, synthetic disinformation websites, blogs, YouTubes, social media pages. And I want you to track with me. Some of you know what I'm talking about, but some of you, I think, will be surprised at some of the things I'm suggesting. What I have realized by looking at the people who are talking on YouTube now, who have blog sites, etc., what I've noticed is that a very large percentage of these, what they are really is they're fake alternative media, news sites, websites, blog sites, social media, YouTube, etc., etc. In other words, they are crafted to look like they're the real deal, okay? That they're truthful. I don't like the word alternative right. That was made up by the media. None of the people I know are, quote, in the alternative right. That's a bunch of baloney. They may be alternative media in that they're truthful in telling you the truth, and they're not part of the propaganda machine of the fake news mainstream media, but they're not alternative right. So what we have now is an explosion numerically, an explosion of tens of thousands of artificial websites and hundreds of thousands of artificial websites. And what they are is they're like defective clones of those alternative media personalities, those alternative media websites, blog sites, YouTubes, social media platforms that actually have integrity, actually deal with investigating very important subjects. And these legitimate, authentic, real deal alternative media sites and personalities, you can trust them to give you accurate, validated, documented, truthful information, whether it's scientific research, political research, or whatever. You find that it's doing a major thing nationally. So The point is that what they've done is, and I believe this is being done, some of it's being done offshore in nations like China and other nations. Some of it is being done primarily with no human hands involved. They are robots and cyborgs and artificially intelligent machine designers creating counterfeit copies of alternative media websites, news sites, YouTubes, social media, etc. So what they've done is a twofold operation. At first, you'll see tens of thousands of these counterfeit alternative media websites. But these things are designed, they use the same template. Like I'll be poking around the internet and I'll see 25 websites with basically the same design and basically the same headlines, but different names of the website, etc., and minimal superficial changes, but they're copycats to the tune of 10,000 different copycats. I believe those are being generated by artificial intelligent machines that have been programmed to design counterfeit, legitimate, authentic, alternative media, blog sites, websites, YouTubes, etc. Then, when you get into the bigger players and the more important questions of alternative media people who have integrity, who have a track record, who document their facts, who do their homework, that have scientific research, then what their strategy is they inundate the internet and social media with counterfeits. Now, they can't counterfeit the actual names of these people and the names of their blog sites, because most of these people, in fact, all of these people, all of the legitimate ones, all of the real deal people, have been on the internet for like 10 years or more, or something close to that. None of them came out in the middle of nowhere. So they have a track record. You can go back in time. But what they've done, and this is all disinformation, this is done by some kind of intelligence operation, either being financed by private corporations or the big tech giants or political activists or perhaps intelligence agencies, okay? Or even the counterfeit mainstream media. So what you'll see is, I'll see now literally hundreds of faces, hundreds of alternative media, I shouldn't say hundreds, thousands of brand new alternative faces, thousands of brand new alternative media personalities using YouTube, blog sites, social media, videos, podcasting, and all kinds of stuff. I'm looking at thousands and thousands of brand new personalities representing themselves as real deal, legitimate alternative media research people, and they masquerade that you can trust them, okay? But here's the problem. If you use your brain, which is just one on switch being activated, and you just analyze what you're seeing, there are the dead giveaways, the clues to the crime. And the dead giveaways are, because I've been doing this a long time, okay? I've been doing this long before the internet came into being. So I know a lot of people, a lot of people. I've spoken a lot of places, both nationally and internationally. I know a lot of writers, authors, legitimate research people, speakers. I know a lot of them personally. I've spoken with a lot of them at different conferences going back decades. And much to the disheartening of some people. I don't restrict myself in terms of my speaking. I don't have a little legalistic yellow legal pad, and I don't have a checklist of like 40 things that people have to conform to, or I will decline an invitation to speak at their conference or whatever. I don't operate like that. There are some things that if people stand for and advocate that are of such a serious matter that, no, I won't be part of their group, I won't speak at their conference, I won't be on their media or whatever. But I don't do it in terms of pharisaical, theological, intellectual micromanagement of other people. Because that's horse manure. That's horse manure, man. That's a cop-out. That's what cowards do. If you want to reach the world for Jesus Christ, then you got to go into all the world for Jesus Christ. If you want to communicate a biblical worldview to people of different cultures, different belief systems, then you have to go ahead and take some risks and mix with people, and you don't restrict your mixing of people to people that think precisely like you do, because that's what a moron does. And Jesus Christ didn't call us to be morons. He called us to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So I intentionally, from the beginning, my theology was founded by personal relationships over a long period of time with some of the greatest Christian leaders of our century. Not because I'm wonderful, but because of the grace of God. And I can rattle off a name of very, very high level, highly respected for their theology and Christian leadership that know me personally, that endorse me and endorse my ministry. I could give you a lot of names, but some of you probably wouldn't know who they are because they've gone on to be with the Lord like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. But people into Christian history would know who they are, and they would know the contemporary people. So why I'm saying this is that when you go onto the internet, you need to be wearing your spiritual armor because it's a battle zone. In fact, you need to be putting on the full armor of God as you travel through cyberspace. You need to put on the full armor of God because the internet has been infiltrated by highly professional operatives. Highly trained. This isn't a paranoid conspiracy. I can document it. So if you have a problem with it, just take a deep breath, keep your mouth closed, and find out whether the documentation is credible. Otherwise, be quiet, because you don't have a right to speak if you're uneducated and ignorant. You're in the student phase, so act like a student. Again, that's not arrogant, it's truthful. So some people won't talk to you like that. I will. I'm from New York City. I'm direct. People think, I'm not comparing myself with Donald Trump. We have two different personalities. But people can't understand why Donald Trump is so direct and stuff. They're always accusing him of being rude and stuff. He's not being rude. He's a New Yorker. He grew up in Queens, Queens. That's the culture. In New York City, and especially Queens, you're not phony. You don't, speak all flowery language about people and then stab them in the back. You speak directly, and you speak the truth, and you let the chips fall where they may. And people like that. In a world of phonies and counterfeits, people like people who shoot straight. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed when I revisited the internet after about 5 or 6 months, that there was 10,000s of brand new websites I've never heard before, run by people with pictures and photographs and YouTubes and articles I've never heard of before. And then as you explore deeper and wider in the internet, whenever I would ask what I would call an alternative media question, And again, I deliberately am refraining from the term alternative right. Alternative right is a dishonest word. I'm not going to play that game. Alternative right is a propaganda, mind control word that is designed to infer people that are presenting documented truth from a conservative position that's thoroughly credible. By calling them alternative right, it's a propagandistic way of inferring that they're, quote, right-wing extremists. Because on the subconscious level, alternative right is synonymous with right-wing extremism. So it's a method of disparagement. It's a method of destroying the power of voices that speak the truth by demonizing them with lies. So I don't say alternative right. I say alternative media. Now, alternative media, there's two kinds of alternative media. There's truthful, authentic, verifiable, real deal alternative media. And then there's this invasion of counterfeit, fake alternative media. And the intelligence agencies are involved in this. The big corporations, the big tech corporations are involved in this. The mainstream media is involved in this. Foreign nations that are doing this for hire are involved in this. It's somewhat of a sophisticated game. So let me give you an example. You type in a topic, again, let's take the topic of chemtrails. For the most part, you can use, it used to be I was recommending one particular search engine. I don't do that anymore. I don't recommend any search engine, except search engines that you can verifiably document are not tracking you and giving away all your information, which they have no business in doing. But in terms of propaganda, in terms of censorship of the truth, in terms of hidden agendas, in terms of bias, most of the major search engines are totally corrupt. They're totally soulless, and they're in the business of fighting a war against truth and promoting propaganda and promoting a specific globalistic, radical leftist political agenda, because they're on the payroll of the globalist elite and they're on the payroll of the intelligence agencies in America and across the world. And I'm talking about the big boys of big tech. Let's just review this quickly. If you think that Bill Gates was stumbling around his garage in Northern California with his buddies, smoking weed, snorting coke, whatever he was doing. He had one particular negative habit, which I don't think it's appropriate to talk about publicly, but it certainly would cause you to perceive him in a different light. So, to put it bluntly, Bill Gates was, halfway intelligent guy, but dumb enough to believe the fairy tale story about how Bill Gates was tinkering in his garage with his buddies and somehow magically invented one of the most complex yet simple yet universal software applications that allowed people to take the internet and make it accessible to the ordinary man and woman. You're crazy, man. You are in need of antipsychotic medication. Bill Gates did not putz around his garage with his buddies and invent something sophisticated as Microsoft and Windows as an operating system. That whole story is a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. I could say things about Bill Gates that I'm not going to. That would be more truthful depictions of his experience. But he certainly did not all by himself and his little lonesome genius self invent Microsoft and Windows. That's just one story that needs to be shot down. He had heavy-duty geniuses come in there and help him build Microsoft and Windows. He had heavy-duty financiers that invested hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into Microsoft and built it up as a world company. And he had the best and the brightest computer software engineers in the world help him put this thing together. Now, let's just do a mental exercise. Who do you think these genius software engineers came from who really helped invent Microsoft and the Windows operating system? Where do you think they came from? You think they're a bunch of surfers and hippies smoking reefer? Or were they highly trained and did they come from specific agencies? Which do you think the truth is? Or do you really believe, are you telling me you really believe that Bill Gates all by his lonesome created Microsoft Windows and built this, massive company where he was formerly the richest man in the world? Do you think he did that by himself? You really do? It's an old New York City joke. It's kind of too old, but I'll tell it to you anyway. This was before the time of the World Trade Centers and a lot of the newer super skyscrapers in the Manhattan skyline. Back then, about 35 years ago, or maybe more, the tallest building, I think, in the world, and the tallest building in the Manhattan skyline was the Empire State Building. And the joke among New Yorkers when you talk to tourists or from people out of town, yeah, I'm not laughing only because I'm a New Yorker. You probably won't find it funny. But the thing is, you would tell people in a joking manner, how would they like to buy tickets to the swimming pool at the top of the Empire State Building? So, I guess there were some crooks that sold tickets to the swimming pool at the top of the Empire State Building. But the big joke was based on the fact that there was no big, giant swimming pool on the top of the Empire State Building. But it sounded good. So it had a lot of mileage as a joke for a number of years. But of course there was no giant swimming pool on the top of the Empire State Building. So, this idea that Microsoft and Bill Gates invented Microsoft Windows is just like the story of the swimming pool at the Empire State Building. It's not true. So let me ask you another question. Do you think the guy from Facebook, who, by the way, just think about this for a moment. When you look at his face, and, well, let's talk about him first, okay? So, the movie about his life suggests that he was hanging out with his college buddies and, wanted to date girls or whatever. They were heavy partiers at some big-time school. And they invented Facebook, which became one of the most powerful social media platforms in the world. And it's like a cult, supposedly. People were saying working at Facebook is like a cult. Okay, so the bottom line question is, do you think a guy with the temperament and the personality of Zuckerberg was putzing around in his garage or in his college room with his buddies, were smoking pot, chasing girls, and do you think he, by all his lonesome, created Facebook and that massive company? Do you think that's the true narrative of what happened, or do you think there's another story? Because rumor has it that he got some heavy duty technological computer engineering expertise and advice from some very high-powered people who just happened to work for some of the nation's most premier military defense and intelligence agencies. So you tell me, which is it? The fairy tale version of Zuckerberg, or he did it all by himself with his buddies? And we could go down the list of some of these tech giants and super entrepreneurs. We could look into the lives of Steve Jobs, or Jobs, or whatever he calls himself, before he passed away. He appeared at least superficially, to have had more of a likelihood of constructing Apple and the Apple computers and the whole thing. But even in his particular case, yeah, I know he did LSD and meditated and stuff, but it doesn't necessarily equate to the fact that he built the Apple computer. In fact, in the movie on his life, it shows the people that he had to hire, the people that he had to bring on board in the very, very early days when he was building the Apple computer system. He had friends, but some high-powered individuals, some that were local talent and some that were like superstars in computer software engineering. And so it wasn't just him, meditating, chanting Om, and creating this incredible system called Apple Computer. He had super geniuses to help him, and like all the other guys among the tech giants, he had investors from mysterious front companies that sunk in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And we could go down the list regarding PayPal, the early days of Amazon, Twitter, YouTube, and all the rest of this stuff. And the common fairy tale is that, it's these Lone Star, hippie, wild types, nerd geek kings that invented this all by their lonesome selves, and their genius did it. And even though they didn't even know how to balance their checkbooks, they knew nothing about administration, they built these financial empires based on their technology. So the question again is, are these accounts true? And you use your head. I don't think they are true. I think they're fictional. I think they're a deliberate myth. I think that they had the help of some of the most sophisticated engineers, computer designers in the nation that were borrowed from private industry, that were borrowed from the intelligence agencies and the Department of Defense. And I think that they had a ton of, let's just call it, mysterious investors that bankrolled these companies to the tune of billions of dollars. That's what I think. That's what I think it was all about. And what would make me think that? Stuff that's commonly available for anybody to read. Not just on the internet. Read Wired magazine, fairly accurate. And there's so many other magazines that are written for people in the computer industry or who are interested in the computer industry. And many of these magazines and articles appear to have a significant degree of journalistic integrity, and they tell the real story of Apple, Microsoft, and all, Facebook and all these other companies. And they don't even blush. They mention the intelligence agency, CIA connections between many of these companies, the intelligence agency and Department of Defense engineers from these companies that built up these massive search engine companies, social media companies, etc., etc. And they sunk through front companies hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. These are facts. And what would the motive have been? Well, the motive is simply this, and this is something that we all need to recognize. The primary purpose of all these electronic toys that we love, the primary purpose of the cell phone, of YouTube, of Facebook, of Twitter, of Google, of the iPhone, the iPad, the computers, the tablets, the Microsoft product, the Google product, the primary purpose, the virtual reality of flat screen TVs. We can go on and on and on. The primary purpose of all this electronic phantasmagoria, the primary purpose is sold to us as if this is entertainment, that we're buying connectivity. Connectivity to what? I mean, rude, and I wouldn't do this personally. I'm happily married, so don't tweak off on me in the wrong direction. I'm happily married. It's not something I approve of from a moral standpoint. But if you think that the purpose of computers and the internet and virtual reality eyeglasses and media and all the rest of that stuff, if you think the purpose is to entertain you, then you must be microdosing the same hallucinogenic drugs that the tech giants, the geeks, the computer engineers, the high rollers in the computer industry, you know this, right? They're all taking the psychedelic drugs of the 60s and 70s, like ketamine and LSD and mescaline and stuff like that. But they're taking it at far lower, far more minimal dosages. And they call it microdosing. So they're not going on full-blown acid trips or something. They're microdosing a minimal amount. And what it does, the microdosing, the minimal amount of psychedelic drugs, is it turns on the creative flow and innovation switches in their neurological mind, and their productivity and their creativity has been amplified because they're taking advantage of science's ability to change the biochemistry of the human brain and enhance it. And they're very careful not to be overdoing the dosage, or they're going to end up running around naked in the park contemplating their navel. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I know you don't know what I'm saying about the last sentence, but you get what I'm saying. So, they're not selling connectivity, because people who, every scientific psychological survey in the United States, in Great Britain, and the world, which is giving us accurate data and measurements on the social behavior, the psychological changes, the physiological changes, the biochemical changes of human consciousness after long-term participation in social media and the internet, are telling us common themes. That people are hungry for connectivity. So like they become addicted to Facebook because this is their way of building friendships, of looking cool and good to their friends or girlfriends or prospective girlfriends. And people are obsessed with their Facebook pages to a degree I didn't quite realize. I mean, each person who's really into their Facebook page or whatever social media they're using, they're producing and directing their social media pages as if they were Hollywood film directors. They make sure those pictures of themselves make them look perfect. The lighting's perfect. The Photoshop is perfect. Makeup is perfect. And they spend hours choosing it because their image is everything on the internet. And you can't take back a picture once you float there. Where the pictures they're taken, what's in the background, can make you look very cool and desirable. So you market yourself. You want to be seen. You can do it two ways, for example. You could be seen in a brand new Porsche, roaring at 100 miles an hour, curving and swirling on Mulholland Drive up in the Hollywood Hills. That's like cool on video on your social media page. Or you could go for a retro look and instead of spending a fortune on a Porsche, you could buy yourself vintage, not the remodeled, not the newer version of the Volkswagen Bug, but you get yourself a real antique Volkswagen Bug that was made like in the 1960s, old school Volkswagen Bug or old school hippie Volkswagen bus. And, even though you've painted and stuff, it still looks a little run down, rusted exhaust pipes and defects here and there. But you're not ashamed of it, see? Because what you're marketing yourself as, you're not marketing yourself as, James Bond. You're marketing yourself as, you're branding yourself as retro, funky, I just woke up and my underwear had a bowl of organic granola, and I'm living up here in the mountains of Oregon and stuff, and I do all my business from my laptop, and that's your brand, that's your persona. And so think of how sophisticated people have become. They've become very savvy about managing their images. The ordinary person is now using the language of the advertising industry, the PR, the political consultancy industry, and the media industry. So the average person who at one time was not even familiar with these words, and I'm talking about, like, junior high school girls and guys, young adults and stuff, they are now, it's part of their normal language to talk about branding and perceiving themselves as a brand, and cult marketing, where they transcend the normal promotional advertising marketing techniques of, like, the stale or older companies, IBM and Wells Fargo Bank and stuff, and they use what is called in the industry cult-like marketing. It's like an underground buzz marketing, you know what I'm saying? And they make it work for them. And in terms of branding, I talk to kids that you wouldn't think would know anything, and they're highly sophisticated marketing people just because they want a social media page that theoretically will enable them to look cool so that people will connect to them. And that the bottom line is they're looking for love. They're looking for strokes, looking for respect. They're looking for admiration and validation. All of the primary psychological needs that we all have. Yet they're using their talents and abilities to create a brand of themselves, you see, to market themselves. So, but the real reason is they're looking for love and acceptance and connectivity and friends. And girls are doing what girls do, and guys are doing what guys do. And I'm not talking about girls putting up slutty pictures of themselves. I'm talking about girls that spend hours and hours and look at other people's YouTube pages, etc., and they imitate, and then they innovate, and they carefully craft their haircut, their wardrobe, the lighting, what room they're in, to portray themselves in an authentic, real way. Because in today's media age, anything that's plastic, anything that's hype, anything that's manufactured hits you in the head like a boomerang. So these girls are savvy girls of all ages, and they want to look attractive, they want to look cute, they want to look sexy, don't have a heart attack. That's since time began, women wanted to look sexy. I'm not talking about provocative, I'm not talking about lewd, I'm not talking about pornographic, I'm not talking about being a slut. Got it? I'm talking about they want to look physically attractive. And if you have a problem with that, then you need to read your Bible and read the Song of Solomon. For starters, there's nothing wrong with that, because there are delineations between a woman hypersexualizing her branding by deliberately wearing, skimpy bikinis or suggestive lingerie type outfits, or a girl that's chosen to wear, some cool blue jeans, cowboy hat going with a country look, or maybe a girl of African American descent going for a more sophisticated urban look or whatever. You see what I'm saying? People think about it. That's their brand, and they're careful about it. And the smart ones don't want to come off. Women, just like they have in previous generations, smart women want to come off in a number of different ways. They want to come off as classy. They want off like a woman of value. They don't want to come off cheap. They want to come off as attractive, physically attractive, dressing attractive. And the smarter girls and women of many ages want to come off natural, organic. I'm not talking about granola hippie barefoot natural organic, but they don't want to look like the Kardashians. But some girls do want to look like the Kardashians, and that's a whole different branding thing. And guys do the same thing. Some guys want to wear a tie and a jacket and be in front of an impressive office building and drive a conservative luxury car. Some guys want to drive, some cool-looking Jeep. I'm not talking about a beat-up Jeep, but cool-looking Jeep, and be like the car commercials. They want to tear it up a mountain with snow and stuff, and that's their brand. And then you have genuine Christian men and women of all different ages. And the ones that are smart, wise as serpents and harmless as doves, they want to present themselves as real, authentic, positive, genuine people that people would respect and think physically have their act together, mentally have their act together, and only after they've carefully established that fact in their social media, then in an appropriate context, not holding up a sign that says turn or burn, they will witness to their Christianity. And they don't necessarily have to water it down, but they want to, if they're going to quote scripture or make a reference to God, they very carefully pick it out. Not to water it down, but they don't want to come off like a wacko nut. And I think that's being smart and effective. So you see the range of possibilities and how sophisticated our age has become. Okay, so back to the radical transformation of the internet. Now we have, you choose a subject, let's go back to chemtrails. And you will see 10,000, this is just going like, 20, 30 pages deep on a so-called respected search engine, and the whole game has been rigged. Now, it used to be when I typed in something like chemtrails, certain names would always come up because there were guys and girls who are prolific researchers on a vast range of topics. Many of them were Christians and conservatives. They did their homework scientifically, historically, spiritually. They wrote, they knew what they were talking about, and what they said was true, and they proved it was true with credible documentation. So what they said packed a punch. It had power. What they said would basically peacefully and not violently detonate in cyberspace all the lies, propaganda, and the disinformation being spun out by the mainstream media that would just flat out lie and say chemtrails are a conspiracy theory, which is a lie, by the way, or that climate change is only due to man-made industrial emissions, which is a lie, or hide from the public because they're one of the secret hidden agendas of the mainstream media is to promote socialism and a new socialist America as the vision for a viable future. Now that's a flat lie. Anybody who's studied the history of socialism, the history of Marxism, and the history of communism knows that on a factual, historical basis, which can be documented by reputable historic accounts, speeches, and the writings of the major communist leaders, as well as black and white photographs in all kinds of books or documentaries, which show the truth, the true, real, truthful story of what socialism, communism, and Marxism have always produced without exception. So you have all the people in the mainstream media lying. Because the reality is, and this is historical fact, that every single communist Marxist revolution, without exception, has ended up in a police state, a brutal dictatorship, where there have been a total of 100 million people killed and slaughtered under communist regimes. The people are starving, they lost all their freedoms, and they were massacred in a bloodbath. That is the objective, historical, factual, documented account of every communist, Marxist, and socialist revolution. But our media want to, because our media is controlled by the globalist elite, they want to sell naive millennials and naive people who are disenfranchised in the lie of this utopian dream of Marxism and communism. So they hide all the dirty, nasty truth from them. And then they use these lies like, oh, well, socialism, democratic socialism, that fixed the problems of the earlier dictatorships of communism. Now that communism has evolved and become democratic socialism, where the people are allowed to vote, they can restrain dictators from being there. They can keep their civil rights. And you see, all of this is lies. But people that are dumbed down and are not educated don't know that those are lies. And I'll give you an example. See, truth has power. I'm putting this in my new book, by the way. And I talk about this, by the way, in my video documentary dealing with mind control and brainwashing. And the name of the video documentary is called American Mind Wars, The Coming Crisis Event. And you can download that at paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. And it's high-volt, truthful material exposing how mind control and brainwashing and propaganda is an essential part of communist deception, globalist deception, and the deception perpetuated by our Orwellian Big Brother media. And that's a fact. And how do we know it's a fact? Because I study history. I do my homework. I'm not a fraud. So, for example, I'll read the historical account and quotes of Lenin, the first powerful communist leader that led the communist Bolshevik revolution in Russia. And these big-time communist leaders, they all told the truth about communism. In quotes, in speeches they made that are recorded that you can hear, they were not trying to sell an illusion about communism and Marxism and socialism. They flat out told the truth because they knew what communism, Marxism, and socialism was really, really all about. So unlike the mainstream media, which is Orwell's thought police and is in the business of lying, these communist leaders, despite the fact that they were monsters, they truth about communism. And so Lenin, the big communist leader, said these words, and you ought to memorize these words. He said, socialism is just one step towards Marxism, or socialism is always the first step towards communism and Marxism. That was a profound statement. Because you see, ever since I've been a kid and people have been trying to recruit me to become a communist or a Marxist or a socialist, even though I was personally involved in the counterculture, I was personally involved in the counterculture of the 1960s, hung out with the big-time leaders in radical politics, and sympathized with many of their revolutionary ideals. I had to keep my mouth shut or they'd kick me out of the meeting. I didn't tell them openly what I really thought about communism. Now remember, I was raised in a super liberal home. I was made an honorary member of the Black Panther Party at like 15 years old. I went to private secret meetings with the big-time radical activists. George Soros was there. I mean, this was all in Manhattan. And so I heard what these guys were planning and thinking. But you see, whenever it came to them asking me what I thought of communism, or, trying to enroll me in a communist revolutionary movement, or a socialist revolutionary movement, or a Marxist revolutionary movement, which they did all the time, people were trying to enroll me. In fact, when I was hanging out in Central Park, leaders of the Weather Underground, that radical communist group, of which Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers were two of the highest level leaders in the Weather Underground. They were arrested bombing the Department of Defense and allegedly blowing up police cars and killing policemen. And these two weathermen, Dorn and Ayers, they kind of discipled Barack Obama in Chicago, and Bill Ayers helped Barack Obama write his book, Dreams of My Father, or whatever it was called. And I remember that the top people in New York City of the Weather Underground were trying to recruit me into becoming a member of the Weather Underground, which was violent, and they believed in violent revolution. And I remember, now you got to remember, I didn't know what I know now. I had a much more superficial understanding of what was going on. But I didn't know about mind control and any of that stuff. But I was a thinker, I was a reader, I was a researcher, even though I was a hippie and a member of the counterculture. I did my homework, and everything that I had read, the facts, the documentation, you see, I wasn't just some airhead like today's millennials. You know, I had a choice. I could have been an airhead. I was raised in an atheist family. I went to public school. I could have been a full-blown certified airhead. But I chose not to be, because I chose to take responsibility for gaining power by gaining knowledge. And that's why I have no patience for Christians who walk around claiming wanting to do God's will, or praying for God to give them a ministry, or going into a ministry like being a pastor or an evangelist or a Christian leader or just a layperson. I have no patience for Christians who want to be leaders and lead others, but are absolutely clueless when it comes to knowledge, which is power, information, historical documentation, facts, and they refuse to self-educate. They refuse to read. They refuse to listen to programs like this. They refuse to develop their God-given abilities and gifts. And the result of that refusal, which is really disobedience to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, is that they, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, is they become weak men and women. Because knowledge is power, and if you don't have knowledge, you're weak. You can't stand your ground because you don't know what you believe. You can't debate anybody. You don't know which way to lead people because you believe the lies of propaganda. You think communism and socialism is going to bring utopia on earth. I can't tell you how many Christian pastors, especially young ones, but older ones too. If I hear it one more time, I'm going to barf my brains out. They stand up there in a pulpit, I'm listening, I'm watching on TV, or I'm in the church, and they talk proudly about the importance of, quote, social justice, how they're committed to social justice, how the primary mission of their ministry or church is to bring about social justice. And I'm sitting there, scratching my head, asking myself the question, how is it that in your pursuit of the ministry, you ended up an airhead with a wind tunnel as a brain? Because you don't even know the first thing about social justice. You've never educated yourself. You've never read books to find out what social justice is and why communism used social justice. You're a complete blank slate. You haven't paid the price to be in the ministry. You haven't developed yourself spiritually and intellectually. You don't have a biblical worldview. And therefore, you're a pushover. You're exactly what the communist revolutionaries want. And I don't say, hey, Paul, you're being unkind, you're putting people down. No, what I'm doing right now is I'm quoting to you verbatim the exact words of the world's first, greatest, most powerful communist revolutionary leader in Russia, who was head of the communist revolution in Russia. His name was Lenin. And you know what he said? Of all these people who were sympathizers, who were idealistic about communism, socialism, and Marxism, who were sentimental about it, who really believed that communism, Marxism, and socialism would bring about utopia on earth. It would bring about social justice. It would heal the world. It would develop the practical structure for us to truly love our neighbors as ourselves. You know how Lenin, this seasoned communist leader, how he perceived all these Hollywood movie stars, directors, best-selling authors, Christian pastors, cultural celebrities, musicians, politicians, movers and shakers, all these people that he called sentimental, that he called looking at communism in an idealized fashion. Lenin, you would think Lenin would have said, great, all these people in America and Europe that are idealistic, people on the left, people from the creative community, the intellectuals, the writers, the poets, the artists, they all have vision. They can all see the benefits of communism. They're all going to join the revolution. You would think he would have liked that, right? No, he didn't like it. He had nothing contempt for these people. I'm not talking about Paul McGuire. I'm talking about Lenin, the communist leader. And neither did the other big communist leaders. They had nothing but contempt for all these intellectuals and writers and filmmakers and Christian ministers and stuff that had this rosy vision of what social justice was. The big-time communist leaders had enormous contempt and disgust for these people because they knew that these people were just a game, that they hadn't really done their homework, they really didn't self-educate themselves about the true nature of communism, socialism, and Marxism, that they were ignorant, and because of that, hardcore communist revolutionaries who paid the price, like Lenin and Chairman Mao, who was the communist revolutionary who took over China, and many others, they actually had enormous contempt and disgust for what Lenin called the useful idiots. So did Chairman Mao. That all these, filmmakers, writers, poets, politicians, movers and shakers, the creative community, the artistic community, they all liked communism, Marxism. And I don't want to name names, but, the superstar Warren Beatty, who at the Academy Awards got lost recently and gave out the wrong award or whatever, he did this film about 20 years ago. Paramount Studios must have given him a fortune. It must have been $45, $50 million back then, which is probably $140 million today, to make this indulgent, celebratory movie about the communist rebel called Reds, which was the biggest piece of dishonest propaganda I've ever seen in my life, and basically is a testimony to the fact that the superstar actor Warren Beatty is essentially an airhead, because he gave this romanticized, glorious, celebratory view of the communist revolution in Russia. And the name of the movie was Reds. And that's not the way it happened at all. You know how Lenin viewed him? Lenin would have called him the words that he called all people like Warren Beatty. He called them the useful idiots. Because meant by that is all these people that were playing at being communist revolutionaries and Marxists, the intellectuals, the writers, the filmmakers, the journalists, the media people, the politicians, and on and on and on. He said because they were overly sentimental, because their connection to communism was all emotional, and they didn't do their homework, they didn't know what they were talking about, they weren't educated, he called them useful idiots, which basically meant Lenin, the great communist leader, said, these people are idiots, but I'm a pragmatist, and like any communist revolutionary, I'm going to use them to generate my communist revolutions, my Marxist revolutions in America and around the world. And I'm going to use the useful idiots as part of my communist revolutionary army. And after I'm finished using the useful idiots, I'm going to shoot them, send them to concentration camps, or dump them in a garbage heap. And that's exactly what he did, time after time. All these intellectuals in France and Paris who romanticized the communist revolution, and in Manhattan, and on and on. the communist revolutionaries, these guys played hardball. They used the idealism of the airheads. But once they were finished accomplishing their communist revolution, they lined them up in front of firing squads and shot them or threw them in concentration camps or massacred them. Because they were useless to him. They were literally useful idiots. And Chairman Mao said something very similar. He didn't portray communism as some cute, romantic, let's establish heaven on earth gig, like these airhead millennials. Somebody vacuumed the brains out of the millennial generation through the education system and through media. They know they're worse than useful idiots. They're zombies. I don't even think Lenin can use them. And I'm not trying to be insulting, by the way. I'm trying to use intellectual shock to wake those of you up that have this sleepy little viewpoint about what reality is all about. And I'm reading to you from the most powerful, evil but intelligent communist revolutionaries the world has ever seen, and what they really thought. So what they really thought was, and let me read this to you. I mean, these guys played hardball. They played to win. So what they did is they used the useful idiots, and then they took over. So Chairman Mao, the communist revolutionary who took over China, that Rockefeller praised in an op-ed in the New York Times. You know why Rockefeller praised him? Rockefeller was not, and the Rockefeller family is not, a bunch of useful idiots. Rockefeller knew exactly what the true purpose of communism was. It was a methodology by which the elite, the globalist elite, could enslave the masses under a dictatorship. Rockefeller understood that. Chairman Mao understood that. Lenin understood that. It's just the airhead useful idiots didn't get it. So this is what Chairman Mao, and by the way, so Rockefeller praises the communist Chinese revolution, which kills like 65 million people. And this is what Chairman Mao said, the head of the communist revolutionary movement in China. And listen carefully. He's just telling you the way it is. Quote from Chairman Mao. Communism is not love. Communism is a hammer which we use to crush the enemy. Okay, so forget about your flowers and peace and kumbaya stuff. Communism is not love. It's brutal force. Communism is a hammer which we use to crush the enemy. So that's what it's all about. But you see, the way communism works, and this is what you have to understand. You must understand this. You must self-educate yourself. You must learn. You must pay the price to learn. If you don't, you're going to be a whimsical. Right now, we are in the greatest spiritual and physical battle for the hearts and souls of mankind, right here in America. And we, right now, are at the tipping point, because we have so many people in our media that are brainwashed into thinking socialism and communism and globalism is the answer. We have so many people in the entertainment industry who believe communism and Marxism is the answer. We have so many people, like filmmakers and writers and stuff, who believe communism and Marxism is the answer. But most dangerous of all, we have increasing numbers of radical politicians who truly, truly believe, because of their stupidity, their ignorance, and lack of education, they have become the useful idiots that Lenin warned about. And they truly believe that by launching a socialist revolution, by turning America into a socialist country, they can implement a communist Marxist revolution in which the oppressed will be set free, there'll be fair redistribution of the wealth, true social justice will happen, and paradise on earth will occur. And the only reason they can come to that conclusion is because they have willfully chosen to be idiots. They have chosen not to read. They have chosen not to educate themselves. They have chosen not to investigate the historical documentation of communism. They're not paying attention to the clear warnings of the communist leaders like Chairman Mao and Lenin and others, and they're ignoring the historical record of communism and Marxism everywhere it plays out. You know what Lenin said? Again, he said, socialism is just a step towards communism, which means that the whole reason the communist revolutionaries developed the term social is because they had a PR problem. It was well known after the French Revolution that every communist revolution, when you added up all the communist revolutions together in the last 100 years, in China and Cuba, in Cambodia, in Russia, and on and on and on, the total death toll of people that were murdered and slaughtered in these communist revolutions was in excess over 100 million people. The people lost all their freedoms, they starved to death, they were sent to concentration camps, they were shot, they were poor, they were oppressed, their freedoms were taken from them. That is the accurate historical legacy of communism. So why would any sane people want to promote that from Washington, D.C., as if it could possibly work? So the communists are clever. Remember, communism and Marxism essentially is an antichrist philosophy, and it moves forward by spiritual deception and lies. You must grasp that. You must own that truth. You can't be weak in accepting the factual evidence that communism and Marxism and socialism conquers lies and deception. Their belief system is by any means necessary. By any means necessary. That means they have given themselves permission to initiate a true communist revolution by any means necessary. And by that they mean they have embraced an antichrist system that is demonic. So they have given themselves full permission to lie, to use propaganda, to use scientific mind control, to kill, to rape, to torture, to conquer, to slaughter, to arrest, to sentence to firing squads, whatever it takes, they're allowed to do it because that is a core principle of communism. And there's no guilt because they've rejected God. Theirs is a Luciferian philosophy. So by any means necessary. So when you see these communist wannabes in Congress, in the House of Representatives, you need to look at them with your rational mind, not the fluttering of your heartbeat. Not because they look kind. Remember, communism advances through deception. And the economic policies and political policies that they're trying to bring into being are designed to ignite a full-blown, ultra-violent, communist revolutionary overthrow of the United States of America. The communist revolutionary policies are designed to incite racial divisions, racial hostility, envy, and race wars. That's all about by any means necessary. You've got to accept that, man. It is what it is. You can't pretend it isn't so. You can't play a little mind game and say, well, no, nothing could be that bad. You know what that's like? I've observed this over the years, and we all are guilty of it, especially those of us that are Christians or have moral values. We want to believe the illusion that all people are basically like us. All people have a conscience. So if we do wrong, we feel guilty. We want to change it. Okay? And we want to do right. But that's a lie. To assume that all people think morally like we do is one of the biggest spiritual deceptions you can embrace. The reality is that not all human beings think like we do. There's a sizable percentage of human beings that can fully function without any conscience, without any guilt, They will do whatever it takes. They will use whatever means necessary. And that means they are fully capable, with not even a blush, of murder, rape, torture, killing, firing squads, people to death, bombs, the most hellish of cruelties. They will employ those as mechanisms to initiate their communist revolution. Plus, you have to understand that they're secular humanists. They believe man is God, and that science and man's reason is God. As such, they have studied the psychology of men and women. They are experts. The communists and Marxists are experts in harnessing the deep inner psychological forces inside human beings to mobilize them to become violent communist revolutionaries. So they use deception, brainwashing, propaganda, and scientific mind control to mobilize people into becoming heartless communist revolutionaries. Let me give you one example, and this is so important. By the way, the burden I have over this is astronomical. I sense that the time is coming very quickly where what I'm warning about is going to play out far faster than you think. There's going to be some tipping point in America that's going to tip the scales, and it's going to be done on purpose. It's going to be standard order out of chaos. And when that tipping point event occurs, it's going to design a methodically planned out, bloody communist revolution in America. And the subconscious, mobilizing scientific mind control force that the communists are highly expert in using is the psychological emotion envy. I want you to pay attention very closely to what I'm saying. I'm trying to teach you something that can save your life and the life of your children. The communists, for decades, have scientifically observed human nature, and they have discovered that every man and woman has a massive area of emotional vulnerability where they feel insecure and second rate. And this causes them to become envious. And so the word envy, yes, it's in the Bible that we're not to envy. We're not to be covetous of what our neighbor has, etc. We know the Bible warns us against this. But you see, the communists understand just how much enormous high voltage psychological power is connected to the emotional state of envy that can exist in the hearts and minds of ordinary people. And the communists have studied how they can exploit to the highest degree envy and use envy as a scientific method of mobilization of the masses, and then added to that in kind of a psychological mathematical formula that is fully scientific. The communist revolutionaries have learned to link this powerful, high volatile emotion of envy. They've learned to link it on a mass level to the denigration of individuals and people, frequently of classes, races, nations, or religious communities that have been very key to political success. Let me break that down for you. When the average man and woman in any society, let's call them the working class or the lower middle class, okay, or the poverty class, the hard workers, could be lower middle class, working class, or whatever. These people work hard, okay? They work harder often than the people above them economically. But they don't see the fruits of their labor. They don't see themselves getting the cars, the houses, the property, the educations, the perks like vacations, the investments that the people, quote, above them are getting. And often, in their perception, the people that are getting all this higher lifestyle stuff are not getting it because they work harder or are more talented. They're getting it purely because they're of a particular class, a particular racial group, a particular ethnic group, a particular nation group, or part of a particular religious community. So these things appear in the eyes of the people who are at the bottom of the ladder. They perceive this as the real reason, not the BS reason, the real reason why these other people are living on a much higher level than they are. And they all have personal stories to tell. And we can't just be blind to these personal stories. Personal stories of tremendous hurt and woundedness that's passed on from generation to generation, where their parents, their mother or father, slaved for some white capitalist company and then got fired with no retirement, and the horrible suffering that occurred, or being deprived of adequate medical care where people died and babies died simply because they weren't of the right race or religious group or whatever. Now, we have to be very careful not to look at reality through our grid. Part of not being selfish is we have to train ourselves to try to view reality through the eyes of somebody else who comes from an ethnic or racial group or community which has suffered and been looked down upon because they have a tremendous amount of woundedness. And saying callous and dumb things like they just need to get over it is not going to bring healing. So the communists are smarter than the Christians in this area, because they know the enormous emotional pain and psychological pain that is being carried beneath the surface by certain racial groups, minority groups, religious groups, etc., etc. They know the incredible pain and suffering. They've studied it. And so all the various approaches of socialism, communism, and Marxism, whether it's the community organizer like Saul Alinsky and Barack Obama, a community organizer, all these leftist helping and aid organizations that get involved in immigration and migration, that get involved in educating people from poor families, getting them food, etc., okay? Helping them in tangible ways. Now, we got to be up to the table here, man, and grow up. The people that are suffering and that are in pain, they're humans like we are. So they see things through a biased grid. And what they see is they see Christians and white people and other ethnic and religious and racial groups as kind of riding higher than they are. And that in their eyes, these people are selfish and self-centered. They don't seem to care about the pain and suffering they're going through, okay? But what they notice is the people from the communist organization and the leftist organizations and the socialist organizations and the Marxist organizations, the community organizers and all the other organizations are at least functioning by rolling up their sleeves, getting them food, helping them with migration, getting them medical care, getting them education, and solving and helping alleviate the yokes of oppression in their lives. Now, whether that's honest or not is not important. That's how they perceive it. In addition, we must become intelligent and educated about this. The people in the communist groups, the Marxist groups, the leftist progressive groups, the socialist groups, not all of them. There's many idealists who are doing it out of a good heart. But what I'm saying is the leaders, the communist revolutionary leaders, know full well that this faking of being concerned, this counterfeit action plan of migration and medical help and education and getting your kids in schools and partnering with you. You see, the people at the top of the communist strategy understand that the only reason that they're doing these so-called good works to help people suffering is that they fully intend to scientifically manipulate the envy that these people on the bottom classes are experiencing when they look at people riding high. The communists understand the power of harnessing envy. The communist strategists understand the psychological power of using envy to mobilize the masses into a violent revolution. So they have devised a very sophisticated, well thought out psychological warfare plan, which involves this specific strategy. Now, I explain this to you. I break it down to you, okay? You're not going to get it in 5 minutes, so you need to get the bundle package that consists of the books Conquering the Matrix, which explains scientific mind control programming, how to recognize if you've been programmed. The book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, it's about the Nazi rocket scientists, MK Ultra mind control programming, the mind control programming of the counterculture, MK Ultra, Manson family, Beyonce, Illuminati music videos, and far more. That book, and then the book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017. No, the book is not obsolete because the title says 2017. That book is very, very important because in the second book of the bundle, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017, I give you God's full plan on economic prosperity, breaking financial bondages generationally, becoming a super entrepreneur, generating incredible wealth in the real world, not the Disneyland world. Because I studied meticulously the principles employed by King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived and the wealthiest man who ever lived. And I am showing you, as God's people, how you can use those spiritual principles and you won't be on the bottom. But you got to understand that that's not a Disneyland door you're walking through. That's a door of truth and reality and power. And you implement God's principles, your life will radically be changed by not some brutal communist revolution, but by the blessing of God integrated with real world stuff. So you need to get the bundle pack. You need ammunition, intellectual, spiritual ammunition. And then you need to get the video documentary, American Mind Wars, The Coming Crisis Event. Because let me break it to you. You are being set up through scientific mind control for a planned catastrophic event, a planned crisis that will center around race riots, race wars, and violent revolution intended to overthrow America as we know it. This is already in high gear, but it doesn't have to happen. But if you're going to have the salt and light behave like a bunch of fools who are uneducated, then guess what? The diligent shall bear rule. That's what God said. Those that are diligent, those that educate themselves, those that acquire knowledge, they will rule. So the question is, and I wrote a book on this like 25 years ago, the title of the book was called Who Will Rule the Future? And basically it said, who will rule the future in the New World Order? Biblical Christians, will they rule the future? Or communists and militant humanists? And I asserted that the group that pays the price in terms of acquiring knowledge, power, and education, they will rule. The lazy ones, the ones that refuse to self-educate and grow in cruise control with their brains, they will suffer in the concentration camps of communist revolutionaries. And if you don't think that can happen, then you're blind to history. Okay, so the communists, under psychological warfare, spiritual deception, psychological deception, and they understand how to take this core, powerful emotion called envy and use it as a trigger to mobilize the masses into violent revolution. And then the way this equation goes, they systematically, through the media, through their agents, they implement the denigration of individuals, but more frequently the denigration or the degradation of certain classes, races, nations, or religious communities. And that has been the key to their political success. So on one hand, they harness the power of envy, but on the other hand, they harness the power of the scientific denigration of people, classes, races, nations, and religious communities so that they will clash in violent revolution, which is designed to place both groups under the captivity of the communist ruling elite. Because the communists never had an intention to redistribute the wealth in the first place. That's just totally a bogus thing. So they've developed a scientific method of arousing envy, which is disguised, listen carefully, as virtue, as compassion, as liberalism. Communist strategy involves the scientific method of arousing envy by disguising it as virtue, as liberalism, as being loving, as being caring. You really have to understand the serpentine nature of their strategy. And what does this do? Communism and socialism, what happens is, and I need you to track with me, I'm not trying to put you down by saying this, but I need you to get up to speed because your life depends on it. You see, what happens is the socialist Marxist revolutionaries deliberately raise up groups like the media, celebrities, and all kinds of people who get to play the game, and that's what it is. They get to play the game that we are the ones that are virtuous. So, for example, Trump is virtuous. Right-wing Christians are not virtuous. They're selfish pigs. So, the game they play is they give themselves a virtuous identity. This is part of the communist game plan. So they disguise themselves as the virtuous people and say stuff like, we are doing this for the poor and oppressed and those that are the victims of racism, etc. This gives the group that is acting as the virtuous, the ones that are feeding the poor and ministering to the oppressed, this gives them a counterfeit sense of moral superiority as well as indignation. It also gives them the opportunity to lie about their identity and say, hey, look, we're more Christian than the Christians. But it's all designed to create a toxic soup and mix where this kind of sitting on your perch and looking down on others and calling yourselves the virtuous ones, the caring ones, all that does is create a setup in which socialist revolution, Marxist revolution, communist revolution is now given the counterfeit legitimacy of unleashing the full fury of its demonic power, which means because they're morally superior, they now have the morally superior right to come down with the hammer, with the armies of communism, with the hardcore revolutionaries, and burn up cities and destroy corporations and break into the houses of people that are privileged. They get permission psychologically and through the media and through kind of like a moral, inner moral sense, that they have the right to use brutal force and power to implement a hardcore, bloody communist revolution, because after all, they're doing it to create social justice. They're doing it to raise up the oppressed class, and they're doing it to get rid of the class of people who have been deliberately PR'd, branded as a degraded class. And the whole purpose of this is to ignite an explosive reactionary process based on the psychological methodology of arousing radioactive envy. You've got to understand the power of envy, man. It can lead to killing, revolution, torture, the whole deal. It was one of the contributory factors for the Jewish Holocaust. The mobilization of envy, the method of arousing envy. This is a scientific principle. This is what I'm trying to convey to you. This is a scientific principle. A scientific principle. And in America, I know that you notice this because you'd have to be blind, deaf, and dead not to see it. Notice that the mainstream Orwellian media thinks as one, talks as one, acts as one. It's like they're all reading from the same teleprompter, which tells you they're not speaking from their own hearts and minds. There's no diversity of information. All they're doing is spoon-feeding predetermined propaganda, mind control, persuasion, and indoctrination into the masses of American people 24/7 through the cable news networks, the entertainment industry, through music, through all kinds of media, social media, etc., etc. And where does this go? Where does this go? Well, we don't have to ask where it goes, because history tells us this. Without exception, every single communist revolution, Marxist revolution, ended up in a brutal totalitarian dictatorship. There was never, ever in any communist revolution anything close to redistributing the wealth fairly, to implementing true social justice. Every communist revolution produced a brand new elite dictator class of the commie elite. All the freedoms, all the rights of the people were stripped from them. Anybody who dared to disagree with the communist revolution was shot, killed, tortured, sent to a mental hospital, or massacred. That is the historical record of Marxism, communism. There is no deviation from this. And once again, the continual lie that socialism has solved the problem and democratic socialism has solved the problem because the people can get to vote and restrain the dictators is a total lie. It's never happened once. It's never, ever happened once. No social justice. The people lose all their freedoms. They end up starving to death, eating out of garbage cans. And right down, not down the road, but in South America right now, we see the fruits of one of another endless amount of socialist revolutions in Venezuela. And one of the things we notice about all these communist revolutions, and this one was begun by Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Every single communist Marxist revolution and Marxist and communist dictator, without exception, without historical exception, 100% of the times, every single communist dictator in human history aggressively promoted gun control laws and enacted and enforced gun control laws. So, before any communist revolution or Marxist revolution was triggered, the Communist Party and the communist dictators super aggressively promoted gun control laws where they seized all the guns from all the innocent people in every single nation where they took over. And I can read you quotes from Adolf Hitler and Lenin and Chairman Mao and others where they emphatically state that in order of progression, an effective communist revolution must first pass gun control laws and seize all the guns from all the law-abiding people in their nation. And then they explain why. They say you need to take all the guns away through gun control legislation so that when we take over violently, when we begin shooting people to death and arresting people to death and sending them to concentration camps, that the average person in the nation that we are now going to dominate and rule under a dictatorship, that they will have no means whatsoever of resisting us or fighting back because we will have passed gun control laws and they will have no guns. You see, stupid American Christians, dumb politicians, the naive, I'm not being sexist, but women who think with their emotions and not with their brain, and men too, all think this, strawberry fields forever emotion that, will take away the guns and the criminals and the gangsters and the revolutionaries are going to leave us alone and we're going to all live in peaceful harmony. The problem is that never happens historically. What happens historically is only the criminals have guns, only the violent revolutionaries have guns, and so when they come knocking at the door with the revolutionary armies, mainly of men, filled with lust, desire for power, the revolutionaries smash into houses and apartments. They demand to seize the guns. They search the houses for the guns. They make sure there's no guns. If there are, they take away the guns. And then, the minute they know that the people are disarmed, they violently rape the women and the children. They shoot the men and the elderly. If anybody's left alive, they're sent to concentration camps where they die soon afterwards. That's the truth. You got to deal with it. So you can continue going to your Christian church, which denies reality. You can continue to go to your Christian church, which is clueless about everything. But you're going to pay a bitter price at the end of it. Because the stuff I'm talking about is starting to roll now. It's not a game. It's not paranoia. It's not sensationalism. It's what's happening now. But in order for you to be proactive and prevent it from happening, because it's not fatalism, we must wake up a critical mass of Christians and others in the United States and other nations who fully understand what is happening, the nature and the strategies of the enemy, what their game plan is, how they intend to implement their game, and then most of all, we need to implement a godly, proactive, but effective and realistic plan to ensure that this communist revolution, or globalist-driven communist revolution, can never erupt in our nation. And that means men, you're going to have to belly up and be a man. And women, you're going to have to belly up, if you will, and be a woman. And we're going to have to work together. And we're going to have to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And don't cop out some psychedelic interpretation of Bible prophecy, which breaks every law of legitimate biblical interpretation. There is no passage in Scripture which says God is going to supernaturally bless his people. God's going to supernaturally put all of his people in a bubble, and we're just going to float up in a bubble over all the anarchy, the violence, the revolution, and the social chaos going on in our society. That is not what the Bible teaches. Now, the Bible teaches that God has delivered us from the wrath to come. The Bible teaches us that God has always made a way of delivering his people, as in the time of Noah, as in the time of Lot, and in other situations. Jesus Christ has promised us that he's going to return. No man knows the exact day or hour. And I don't think it's prudent to argue about the timing of the rapture. I think it's more prudent to be prepared spiritually and physically in any eventuality. That's called being responsible. And to obey the Lord in the first place, because if we obeyed the Lord in the first place, no matter when the Lord returns, we're going to ensure for ourselves the supernatural protection of God because we obeyed what he told us to do. For example, if we're winning souls for Christ, we are transforming the composition of our society. If we're making disciples of all nations, we're transforming the way people think in our society. If we're obeying Jesus and truly occupying the land until he comes, we're not allowing the demonic, the communist revolutionaries, the seekers of destruction to initiate their bloodthirsty demonic plans. We're not allowing that. And if we do business until he comes, it means we're being prudent and we're on our jobs and on the game spiritually. So I don't know about you, man. I can't shake off a sense of divine responsibility. I can't shake off a sense of divine accountability. I can't do that. My head won't go down on the pillow asleep. I can't go into cruise control. I wish I could. I'd have a more peaceful life. I look at all these pastors, man. I'm not picking on pastors, but I've just seen one too many sermons on television, one too many sermons in churches where the pastors are absolutely clueless as to what's really going on in our nation and doing basically nothing in an intelligent, biblically thought out way to lead God's people in an effective plan so that God's people and other people, that they can be under the protection of God, their children can be under the protection of God, and that we allow God to supernaturally intervene in our nation because we've done our part. I don't know about these pastors. I don't know what's in their heart. But I am tormented with a torment that I have no words to describe, that God forbid Paul McGuire should be an unfaithful watchman, snoozing as the enemy comes in from the distance, which he is, and I failed to blow the shofar. God's that watchman, and I don't want to be that watchman. Because you failed to warn my people in enough time, because you failed to blow the shofar, then I'm going to hold the blood of my people. You are going to be accountable, Paul McGuire. You call yourself a watchman. You're going to be accountable for the destruction that happens. I can't live like that. Now, conversely, if I've done everything I can, through books, through television, through messages, through writing, through speaking, to blow the shofar, to give God's people a plan, that will work, and yes, it will work. But God's people and the leadership refuse to, are committed to ignoring the warning. And then if they're slaughtered, I will not rejoice over their slaughter. But at least I will know that the Lord is not holding me accountable for the slaughter that did not have to occur. So my final challenge to you is you need to step up to the plate. 2019 is a different year. This is a serious transition. I am telling you, based on over 45 years of research, the political, economic dynamics, the way the media is behaving, the hidden agendas that are going on, the positioning, the game that I see unfolding right before my very eyes, that including my intensive research into what is causing these things, we are entering highly dangerous territory in 2019. It is beyond what many of you conceive could happen. That inability to conceive what happens, you need to renew your mind with the Word of God and move beyond that. You need to be able to not be terrified, but you need to be able to conceive the potential of what could happen in terms of egregious evil in our nation. But you must also fervently cry out to God, seek the face of God, obey God, and if you obey God, and if you choose to obey God proactively, and if you choose to do your part, just your part, I promise you God is good. I promise you that together, if we partner to seek God and do what He tells us to do, I promise you that together we will live to see the minute and the hour where God Almighty supernaturally intervenes in the affairs of our nation, and what should have been our destruction turns out to be our hour of victory and triumph, where the Lord of hosts invades our nation and turns the tide of the spiritual battle. There is nothing in Bible prophecy that indicates that God's people are simply going to be set up for some kind of slaughter before His return. In fact, the opposite is true. The Bible tells us to occupy until He comes. Occupy means exercise rulership, dominion over the land. That means don't allow the enemy to prevail. And we can do that, a doable thing. So, I'm asking you to join me. I'm in this for everything there is, folks. There's not an ounce of me that's not in this for keeps. I recognize life is short and life is temporary. Every day is a gift from God. I've been sent here to fulfill a divine mission, just like you have. I'm imperfect, just like you are. I'm not any more holy or any more spiritual or any more smart or any more anything else than any one of you. I'm really not. I really can't say that I have any real virtues, because that would be to boast in my flesh. I would have to actually tell you that any virtue you may think emanates from me, any gift of the Lord where the Lord touches you because of me, I would have to honestly say the only realistic appraisal would be to say to you that has nothing to do with Paul McGuire or the flesh of Paul McGuire. That any goodness, any reflection of God you see or hear in me is totally due to the grace of God and the unmerited favor of God and Jesus Christ alone. And as such, I'm not trying to be humble. I'm not trying to be humble because that's the brutal, ugly, nasty truth. My job is just not to deny the truth. I am a servant of God called by grace just like you are. And when I say called by grace, I mean unmerited favor. I am not in this position because, I'm Billy Graham. No, I'm in this position because Jesus Christ saved me on the back roads of Missouri miraculously when I was fleeing a Christian religious retreat because they were so dead. I was saved miraculously in the back roads of Missouri. I was a member of the counterculture. I was a radical. I hated Christians. God miraculously saved me. It was a supernatural event. And then, when God saved me, after He had begun to prepare me for a very unusual calling, I felt the call of God on my life. But in my sinful human nature, and in my flesh, and in my pride, I bristled. Even after He was gracious enough to save me, I rebelled against God. Because part of me, my sin nature, wanted to go back to the party lifestyle. Hang out with the hippies and stuff. And so the Lord, in His goodness, allowed me to rebel from Him and go back to the pig sloth that He delivered me from. And in that pig sloth, the grace of God allowed me to be broken in the flesh. In other words, God did not spare me from the repercussions of my sinful choices. And He broke me. And so I returned to New York City. And I heard a preacher who preached the gospel of Jesus Christ, a Baptist preacher with an English accent, preaching from Calvary Baptist Church in Manhattan. But he preached the gospel, not some 31 flavors sensitivity workshop message. He preached the gospel of Jesus Christ, and he said something I never heard any Christian preacher say before. He challenged us under the anointing of the Holy Spirit that we need to do more than just invite Christ into our lives to be our Savior. And then he challenged all of us to come forward if we wanted to bow at the altar and invite Jesus Christ, not to just be our Savior, but invite Jesus Christ to be our Lord. And I did that. And Jesus Christ became Lord of my Lord, a Lord of Lords, and my Lord. Does that mean I'm perfect? No. But Jesus Christ has honored that. And I continue to serve him. Jesus Christ is my Lord, not just my Savior. And so it's with that, I share with you my commission. And I know that many of you have been called with the same commission I have, and that's what compels you to listen to this program. We do it together. The enemy is united. We must be united. But the scripture goes, one can put 10,000 to flight. Doesn't matter whether we have lesser numbers. We have God Almighty in the chariots of fire. So, the hour has come for each one of us to accept our assignment before Jesus Christ and obey him. And I'm asking you to accept your assignment before Jesus Christ right now and obey him. And 3 ways that you can do this practically in terms of partnering with me in the spiritual battle is I invite you, I implore you to continue to be faithful as spiritual warriors. Pray for me, my family, and this ministry. And that means I thank you for the way you have been praying, but continue to pray in the Spirit and power. Because this ministry and myself and you, we're not just fighting flesh and blood. We're fighting principalities and powers and the dark unseen forces of wickedness in heavenly places. Spirits of witchcraft, spells, Satanism. When you're in the front lines, that's what you're dealing with. As you, as a prayer warrior, an intercessor called by God, I need you to stand with me in prayer and break these demonic assignments that would come on us. But because we break them in the authority of Jesus Christ, they cannot. But we have to join together. I pray for you, I feed you, you feed me, you pray for me. And we will break the power of the demonic as you exercise your authority as a woman or a man that has been supernaturally called to be an intercessory prayer warrior. I thank you for your obedience. For those of you that understand the pragmatics of censorship and the hidden attempt to block the communication of the truth from social media and the internet, I thank God for you. God has you to help me because he's given you unique knowledge and insight. And I ask you to continue to wait on God to get the mind of Christ. And don't wait for an invitation, for crying out loud. Step out and be an intermediary and help us distribute the links and get the access we need in the internet and social media. Don't wait. Many of you have the capacity of doing amazing things. Don't wait for an invitation from me. If it's right and it's good and it's wise and it's prudent, I need you to open the doors. God gave you that talent, and he will grow that talent and other talents to the degree you're willing to put it into his service. So thank you, all of you that do that, who have responded to the call of the Holy Spirit. And finally, the intensity of the battle is going to ratchet up to an unbelievable degree this year. It's going to get very intense. And therefore, this ministry, Paul McGuire Ministries and Paradise Mountain Church, is committed to being strategic, to being led of the Holy Spirit, and to being victorious. And therefore, like any spirit army or any spiritual force, we must have over and abundant, adequate spiritual munitions, spiritual weapons, spiritual technologies. That means communications technologies, televisions, computers, staffing, capacity to move farther in video, capacity to reach more and more people through an entire array of streaming so it can't be interfered with. And so I challenge those of you, but before I challenge you, I want to thank every one of you who have chosen to be regular givers to Paul McGuire Ministries in Paradise Mountain Church. We have another Paradise Mountain Church meeting coming up the last Wednesday in February, by the way. Join me there. Visit paulmcguire.us. But here's my challenge to you. The battle is going to intensify. Therefore, the spiritual machine which engages in spiritual conflict and will win spiritual conflict, we need to increase our financing levels substantially. Substantially, because the Lord is calling us to substantially increase the territory we are to occupy and the territories that we're to drive the powers of darkness out of. So I simply ask you to go to the Lord as a spiritual warrior, as a spiritual man or woman of God who has chosen to obey God. And go to the Lord and simply say, Lord, instruct me on what I am to do in terms of financial contributions and financial donations to Paul McGuire Ministries in Paradise Mountain Church. And thank you for whatever obedience you give to whatever the Lord commands you to do. But I want to exhort some of you to wait upon the Lord, to listen to the Lord, to cry out to God. Ask Him to speak to you supernaturally. No stale communication. Ask the Lord to give you a supernatural vision and supernatural communication, so you know in the Spirit where we're going. So you have a clear understanding of how we're labeling the intensity of the entire thing. So, I thank you for your giving. And I ask you to go to the Lord and simply ask Jesus what to do. And whatever Jesus Christ tells you to do, whether He tells you immediately, whether you need to wait on Him, whether He speaks to you, whatever God tells you to do, however He lays it on your heart, like a good soldier in the spiritual army of the Lord, obey Him, as I obey Him. And together we shall take the land. And together we shall occupy the land. And together we will fulfill the commission. And with that, I rejoice. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.